ऐसा Ok, empezamos. I would like to request all of you to mute your microphones on the mobile or on the computer, please. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, colleagues, and dear participants, a warm welcome to everyone watching from India, Mexico, Spain, and across the globe. Welcome to the second edition of Ibero-American Voices, India's first festival and platform for the exchange between the poetic voices of India and Ibero-American countries. I am Shubhro. My name is Shubhro Bandyopadhyay, and I am the coordinator of this festival on behalf of Instituto Cervantes and of the Embassy of Mexico. Here, the first edition of Ibero-American Voices explored the intersections between the plural voices of Spain and Mexico and the melting pot of cultures and languages itself, India. This year, we have a wider participation of poets, not only from India, Spain, and Mexico, but also from Chile, Peru, Colombia, who will come together to explore the shared features in the lyric, aesthetic, and contact points, multilingualism, and the experience of dialogue in the intimate sphere of the poet as a translated self. IBAV began as a joint endeavor last year of the Instituto Cervantes, New Delhi, and the Embassy of Mexico in India to stimulate the dialogue between the creators, translators, editors, publishers, readers of poetry in India, Spain, Mexico, and other Latin American countries. Before we begin, I request His Excellency Federico Salas, Ambassador of Mexico to India, and Mr. Oscar Pujol, Director of Instituto Cervantes, New Delhi, to offer welcoming words to the participants and to our audience. Distinguished Ambassador, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Subro. It certainly gives me a great pleasure to welcome all of you from India, from Mexico, from Spain, to this inaugural session of the second edition of the Ibero-American Voices in India. It is now taking place in this virtual platform. Last year we had it at with the presence of all of us, but it is a very good sign that we keep this alive in the new modalities that are available to us. So I'm very happy that this is taking place. We are particularly pleased to partner once again with Instituto Cervantes in this endeavor to explore the intersections between the plural voices of the Ibero-American world, and as was just said, of the melting pot of cultures and languages itself, which is India. So in this regard, I want to thank my good friend Oscar Pujol and his team for the trust and effort that they have invested in this project. And I would also like to recognize on the part of the Embassy of Mexico, Santiago Ruy, who's in charge of cultural affairs, and Garima Pand, who was working with him to make this possible. I definitely want to extend my gratitude to Subro himself who's a good friend of Mexico,
Sure.
has been a good ally in our effort to develop closer ties in the literary realm between our countries. During this session, we will be listening to Lara do Paso from Galicia, Akhil Katyal and Aditi Rao from India. And I want to thank all of you, and of course, Miquea Sanchez, who's currently in the state of Chiapas and will be reading in Soque, which is one of the 68 indigenous languages of Mexico. Very welcome to you. I think that in this time of COVID, when we all have been somewhat isolated and confined to our spaces, the poetry has proven to be a significant cultural response, a source of consolation in some way, and certainly a powerful form of self-expression. I think that this is the underlying message of the 2020 edition of Ibero-American Voices in India, that is to offer our audience a space of reflection, of hope and inspiration through poetry and the aesthetics that poetry brings to our lives. So thank you all of you for your interest and time, and certainly for your participation, and hope to see you in the follow-up sessions of Ibero-American Voices in India. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for your welcoming remarks. Now, I would request Oscar Pujol, the director of Instituto Cervantes, New Delhi, to share us a special address.
Thanks, Subro, for giving me the floor. I want to greet our very dear Mexican ambassador here in Delhi, His Excellency Federico Salas, and the cultural counselor Santiago Ruiz Sanchez. Also, I see here the cultural counselor from the Embassy of Argentina, Carlos Muscari, many friends, and our esteemed colleagues like Viva Mauri and Minisoni also are here with us. And of course, I want to thank, first of all the people who are making this possible, beginning with Martí, Eloisa, and Vikash from the Cervantes Institute, of course, the Ambassador Federico Salas, Santiago and Gauri from the Embassy of Mexico, and above all, Subro Bandopadiai, my dear friend and colleague, who is also the mastermind behind this project. But I would like to say that this is not only the brainchild of Subro, but his heart child, because as a poet, he feels with his whole body and soul. We have a very beautiful expression in Spanish, say that he has a sensibilidad a flor de piel. I don't know how to translate that in English. Perhaps something like sensibility under the skin. But thanks, Subro, for this gift of poetry, especially in the uncertain, confusing, and hazardous times of the coronavirus. I want to thank, of course, all the poets that will take part in this festival, and especially those that are here today. Lara do Paso from Spain. He is in the beautiful Galicia, there in the northwest of Spain. Miquea Sanchez from Mexico, Aditi Rao, Akhil Katyal in India. I cannot name all the poets that will take part today in this session, but I have to mention two very special sessions with two outstanding poets like Chantal Maillard and David Huerta. As I said, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce the second edition of this literary festival, a literary festival dedicated to the poetry written in the languages of Latin America, Spain, and India. And it's conceived as a meeting to promote poetry among the Indian public, but also committed to the values of multilingualism and multiculturalism. I was impressed in the first edition last year by the variety of languages that the festival uses. It's really a pluriverse, as Subro says. And again, in this edition, we'll have languages as Soque, Galician, Spanish, Kasi, Hindi, English, and perhaps a few more in our sessions. We have here people from Spain, from Mexico, Chile, Peru, Venezuela, India. Welcome all of you to this multilingual and multicultural poetry festival. Allow me 2 minutes more, just to end it with a small reflection on poetry. I feel that poetry, along with hunting and gathering, must be one of the oldest occupations of humankind. And poetry partakes something of both hunting and gathering. Hunting for the right word, the right expression, where sound and meaning coalesce with such an intimacy that you can no longer separate them. That is why it is so difficult to translate poetry, because it is not easy to keep the delicate, fragile, and unstable balance between form and content. Poetry, moreover, is also gathering, because a good poem, whether you like it or not, gathers inside you as an aftertaste, flavoring your feelings and impregnating your whole being. Like a good cup of tea or wine, it is the aftertaste that really counts. The resonance, that which cannot be expressed with words, the dhwani and the rasa of Sanskrit aesthetics. I do not know how poetry started. I do not know if first it was the cry of a wounded man, the scream of a laboring bowman, or the inebriated shout of a warrior. But not. Poetry is not of human origin. Man did not invent poetry. And do not consider, even for a minute, that we receive poetry from those dubious beings that we call gods. No, poetry is not of divine origin either. I think we humans learn poetry from the animals in the forest and the birds in the sky. They, animals and birds, are still better poets than we are, because their voices blend perfectly with nature and ours not. In any case, and I am concluding here my remarks, I would like to ask our human poets here today to make their voices as spontaneous, unrestricted, and vibrant as those of birds and beasts, and to break the boundaries of our little ego and make us free, at least for a few days, from the constraints of life in the celebration of poetry. Thanks, Subro, and thanks all the poets for these wonderful sessions that await us.
Thank you, Oscar, for your lovely comment on the session and on the festival and on poetry itself. Every time I listen to you, I learn a new thing from you. Today's inaugural session will be a poetic soiree of diverse voices that speak the same language, the language of poetry. 5 talented poets constitute today's panel, and they will offer the audience a unique experience of the word as it traverses multiple linguistic, literary, and cultural realms. I'm pleased to introduce today's poets. First up is a poet from across the continent who writes in Galician. As we all know, Galician is, we can say it clearly now, is the mother of Portuguese language. She's Lara do Passo from Spain. She lives in Galicia. Her first book, Dende Ilha Peixe, won the award Galicia Crea in 2008 and became in 2008 and became the base for the short film Ilha Pedra by the filmmaker Adriana Paramo. She obtained Francisco Añón Award 2015 for her work Obeja and the Nortear Award for Clementina Story. And in 2017, she received the Fis Vergara Vilariño for poetry, prize for poetry collection. Her texts are part of different collected publications and anthologies of Galician poetry in various languages. Before we hear from Lara, I would like to inform our audience that for those who do not understand the original language, the poems we have simultaneous translations that would be provided through the chat. You can now check your chat and you can find a PDF document, and that would have all the translations of the poetry. And Now, Lara, please take us through some of your poems.
Thank you, Sobro. Good afternoon to everyone from Galicia. I am very happy to be part of this reading today with these three amazing poets from Mexico and India. And I would like to thank Instituto Cervantes and the Mexican Embassy for organizing this event, and Sobro for inviting me, and with me, my mother language, that is Galician. And of course, I would like to thank also to Lau Cesar Coeglin for her amazing and excellent versions of my poems into English. The three poems I'm going to read are part of my book Klaus and the Scorpion, Klaus e o Alacrán, and this is the first one. O mar está en calma, ainda que é inverno. Ainda que hai temporal, o mar está en calma. Fixo a vista e podo velos gravados nos muros de pedra, invisibles no pasar dos dedos. Diante de min un desfile de corpos que non me interesa. Perdo volume co pasar dos días, perdo aire, pero o mar está en calma, e só por iso respiro. Eu podo ser a seguinte, podo perdelo todo sen apostar, e que iso explique o zunido nos oídos, a cópula frenética dos insectos antes de morrer, as pingueiras en riba da cama que cruzan de auga as paredes da casa. Ben Jacob coas súas 13 tribos, apúntame cun cetro, di, por que non es feliz se eu si son feliz? Eu dígolle, marcha, non quero lembrar o teu nome. Deixo o cetro en riba do meu ventre, e con el domino as bestas que me habitan no inverno, pero o mar está en calma, e as bestas acougan. O desfile de corpos continúa, pero eu pidolles que saian das salas e miralos aos ollos. A sala é unha avenida enorme, tan grande que non pode pertencer a esta cidade, a ningunha cidade coñecida. Quedo soa naquela avenida de terra, co peito descuberto, agardo a que veñan os cabalos, mandas de cabalos sen cerrar a golpearme no peito. Atravésanme de lado a lado, pero como estou soa, podo chorar. Os cabalos berran o meu nome e o nome dos meus pais, ameazan con romper os vidros que me cubren o corpo, pero eles saben que o mar está en calma, aínda que eu chore. Teño o útero roto en 1000 anacos que recollo do chan e gardo sen orde. No espazo do útero meto unha folla seca co meu nome escrito en tinta negra. Cos anacos de útero tapo as fendas do tellado dos muros da casa, protéxome da chuva. Vou ao porto, coas marcas dos cabalos a saírme por fora da roupa. Aparto os barcos coas mans, os barcos cargueiros inmensos. E choro de felicidade porque, a pesar do temporal, a pesar do inverno, o mar parece en calma. E só por iso respiro. The second one. Perderei a cabeza o día que non vos teña canda min, e máis, perderei a cabeza. Camiñarei sen rumbo polos bordos dos pratos esportelados, camiñarei polo muro pequeno da horta, comido polo verdello. Falarei soa máis do que xa falo, e pode que deixe de me vestir ou me vista en exceso. Perderei os ollos. O día que vos perda, perderei todo o que me cinguiu, o que fun. Porque sei, desde sempre, que aí perder a cabeza e a dor será unha dor punzante e continua. Dos ollos, posturas do peito, xa así, reventado. Estouparei da cara dentro e as estelas dos vosos retratos quedarán cravadas nos órganos máis descoñecidos, nos riles, no fígado, nos pulmóns. Só sei unha cousa, perderei a cabeza, o día que non esteades comigo. Serei viúva de viuveza imposible, mas non orfa, porque as orfas xa non visten loito, e eu vestirei loito por vos, e vestirei loito por min. Deixarei que as tellas caian sobre as caixas do peixe frío, que caian limóns enormes de todas as árbores. Perderei a cabeza, e máis. Pecharei a casa como unha fantasma. Poñerei todo o ouro e dormirei con el, porque aínda terá a vosa calor, e unha vez a semana chamarei por teléfono a números descoñecidos. Abrirei as cartas, unha por unha, para deixalas en ler. Non diferenciarei as fotografías dos espellos, e o meu camelio murchará, e o cheiro da verdura murchará, e a roupa limpa murchará. Comida pola enfermidade que non ten nome, perderei a cabeza ata volverme invisible, e deixarei no abandono os meus apelidos, o nome co que me construístes, mentres todos os meus libros arden. Porque eses libros non souberon prepararme para a dor, nin souberon da demencia, nin me chamaron polo meu nome. A cama sen facer nos sucesivos cuartos das sucesivas noites e o pelo agromando desesperado polos recantos do patio. Non darei de comer aos gatos nin sequera para enganalos co veneno. Simplemente deixareime, como se deixan as traves vellas de madeira. Perderei a fala, sustentada sobre vos, e todas as referencias e as estruturas. Detrás delas, das referencias, das estruturas, cairei eu, bella, ida, enferma, co peito aberto en canal, posto a sollar como os corvos. Non terei cabeza cando non vos teña a vos, non terei nome nin casa. And for finishing the third one, eu ás veces soño que existe Amador, como se Amador puidese existir, el, as súas condicións de posibilidade. Amador ten dous nomes, un é Amador, outro é Guadalupe, e eu soño con chamalo desde o medio dunha eira unha tarde de sol polos seus dous nomes, Amador Guadalupe, e que a miña voz faga tremela a erva. Querelo como só se quere a carne que sae dunha despois de sangrar. Pero eu sei que Amador non vai ser, porque o proceso de ser parece tan doloroso como unha tarde de calor, como os picazos no peito despois de traballar 1000 horas por un xornal mercenario. A min prodúceme moitísima tristura pensar nel, nos seus ollos inmensos, cheos de noite, coa placenta tatuada no iris. Prodúceme ansiedade pensar nel, no valeiro de pedra, nun eido que non existe, nas ovellas mansas que dormen ao meu pé coa súa brancura de memoria. A perda e todas esas cousas. Quero escribirlle dúcias de cartas que nunca ia escribir polo medo a ser chamada enferma. Entón fago unha coroa de flores e trenzo o pelo e recollo por riba dos ollos, pero como non teño mans, non podo amañalo ben, e aleteo sen rumbo enredada nas paredes do cuarto. Bato contra as fiestras, contra as portas desta casa que non ten portas. Os meus ollos absorben a luz, pero non identifican as formas. Amador, é tristísimo que non existas. Choro, é tristísimo ese peito baleiro, ese útero baleiro. Gardar o teu nome bordado na roupa da casa como se estiveses morto. A mortalla, as sabáns, os panos, os manteis e a cubertería con debuxos de flores, a louza rabuñada de tanto lavar no lavadoiro onde beben as vacas e eu limpo a parte anterior dos ollos, a boca. Pero ti non sabes o que son as vacas, nunca vas mirar unha vaca. Amador, que nome bonito dispuxen para ti, que peito de non ser esta carraxe, este odio, este amor todo descoñecido. Berro o teu nome polos eidos e os veciños saen á porta da casa e miran con medo os pés cheos de feridas. Pero tras dos eidos está o mar, as bateas calmas, as illas, e despois da erva do mar estás ti, Amador doloroso, útero florido. Thank you very much, moitas grazas.
Thank you, Lara, for your beautiful, I must say, versos atlánticos. I remember with your refreshing poetry, I always remember the day when I met you in Galicia, in a rare sunny day in Galicia. It was not raining there. Thank you very much for everything. Moving on to the next poet, Delhi's Akhil Katyal. Akhil is a poet translator and the author of Like Blood on the Bitten Tongue, Delhi Poems. His first poetry book, Night Charge Extra, was shortlisted for Muse India Satish Verma National Award in 2015. And how many countries does Indus Cross won the Editor's Choice Award from the Great Indian Poetry Collective in 2016. He currently teaches creative writing at Ambedkar University. I request Akhil to read his poems.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank Garima and everyone involved in this program for having me here. The first poem that I'm going to read is on my grandfather, who, when he was a young man, he came to this country from what is now Pakistan. It's a poem called My Grandfather would ask us to read him the shop signs in Hindi. Mintu Ice Cream, Jagat Hardware, Chitra Cinema. All his life, he only knew Urdu. Leaving Lahore at 18, a young railway clerk knew at the desk then. In the early months, he struggled. Tried opening a cigarette shop at Panchkuiya Road in Delhi before being given the same job in the Indian Railways in Lucknow. In all this commotion, he never bothered learning another script, dependent still at 73 on his grandchildren to read him ice cream signs when he treated them to an orange bar. Years later, when I ache to read Faiz's letters in his own handwriting, I have to write to a Facebook friend in Lahore or ask an old Jangpura neighbor, or worse, use a translation app which is like rubbing stones on silk. As grandfather and I stumble through these years, Urdu, Hindi still look on at each other in an old mirror convexed by history, reaching around its opaque silver. This year, after my second Urdu class, I get straight on the blue line, nuktas arraying in my head for the Ramakrishna Ashram station. Here, in this first city of his coming, Panchkuiya Road, where he tried but failed at a living, Panchkuiya Road, that of the 5 old Mughal wells, Panchkuiya Road, where grandfather and I, after the opacity of years, find homework in a Delhi road sign. We caress old shapes into meaning, curve old losses, draw water with a new tongue. And this is what happened when the subcontinent was sundered into 2 countries. That partitioning also happened often with languages, which came to be considered as if they belonged to 2 different religious communities, which they never did. The second poem is actually also originates from Pakistan. It's on one of the legendary singers of South Asia called Farida Khanum. Several of you might have heard her. For those who haven't, even if you don't have access to language, hearing her would be an experience in itself. Farida Khanum is now in her, if I'm not mistaken, in her early 80s. This is a poem which was written recently. When Farida Khanum sings now, she does not hide the age in her voice. She wraps it in paisleys instead, and for a moment holds it in both of her hands before drowning it in our sky. When she sings now, she knows at the end of that note, when her voice breaks like a wishbone, he will stay. I thought I'll end with 2 love poems. Even this third poem has a reference to what is currently a kind of a ruinous landscape, which is in Pakistan. It's called You. You are 2 eyes Venn diagramming into each other. You are a cartwheel, a windmill, a reluctant multiplication sign. You are odd parallel lines or an ancient tree caught fire. Some nights you are iron hammer or dead fish or hot tongue. You are Harappan script, indecipherable grammar. I have always got you wrong. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Akhil, for sharing your poetry with us and taking us to a different landscape, I must say. We have to now probably in this 21st century we have to invent a term for the lost parts of our bodies that are called Bangladesh and Pakistan. For a Bengali speaker, it's still Bangladesh is when we talk about Bangladesh, we refer to Bangladesh as East, and it's still there. It's somewhere you cannot just really erase the things so easily. And for you were talking about Urdu, I every day in any part of Delhi, you can see people reading Urdu newspapers. Basically, they're reading Punjabi in Urdu script. That's it, and that's their language. You cannot really take that language for the sake of partition. That's really wonderful. Thank you so much for this for this nice Now we have a poet from Chiapas, Mexico. Miquea Sanchez is a poet who writes in Soke, writer, radio producer, translator, and teacher. Her work forms part of several anthologies, and she has authored books including How to Be a Good Savage in 2019, Mokaya in 2013, We Are All Bighorns 2012, From My Marrow 2011, and You Will Know One Day 2006. Part of her work has been translated into English, Bengali, Italian, Mayan, Catalan, German, Miche, and Portuguese. She has received Patotan Indigenous Poetry Award for and the first prize for narrative and Bolom says. She is a member of the National System of Creators of Art in Mexico. And I here must share one thing with all of you. Miquea sent me her book, Mokaya, long time back. We are a long time acquaintances. Since 2014, we are friends. And when I got this book for the first time, I was really stunned and complete, very, very pleasant and surprised to get a book printed in one of the 68 languages of Mexico. And I, of course, read the poems in Spanish translation. This book is bilingual. Miqueas, now I would invite you. Miqueas, ahora yo pues, te invito a leer tus poemas. Muchas gracias por estar aquí otra vez.
Hola, quiero aprovechar para agradecer a la Embajada de México en India por esta consideración y la verdad, a pesar de que no comprendo bien el inglés, un poco lento, lo estoy disfrutando mucho y quiero compartirles unos poemas en mi lengua materna, que es el xoque, recordando también que hace 2 días se recordó la resistencia indígena y yo, viniendo de un pueblo de origen indígena, pues quiero recordar a mis abuelos con estos poemas. Jesucristo is hanyak un su mamá is kionuxkuy. Un su mamá is hamius paka Castilla ore. Na su kiamba yomi is kionuxkuyam. Na su sha tumunavisu kiamba ukam yanukuis nusokyutam. Un su mamá is yang hambana huche ore o morirena muspabotutamos sawahi. Tese kutneviana eyabogomi sinangomoram. Tese nakonuxpa chokoyi ni ise. Jesucristo is hamias na kionuxkuy. Te llore un su mamá nye nyo ituna pomarrosas yomaram. Tese sunvana tu mamá sagirungomoram guadbasenaka. San Miguel Arcángel is hamias na kionuxkuy. Un su mamá is kionuxkuy cuenengomo yacho incutamdena. Ukishtit numbana, te ese pollas pana te toyaram. Patsoque huespana, te se te sango mitana yangukiama. Te yangukiamari que punaya hukuya yuneram.
Gracias, Miqueas. Puedes seguir el segundo poema. I would remind all of you that you can have all these poems translated into English. You can access to your chat and download the translated version that is there already. Miqueas.
¿Cómo ser un buen salvaje? Mi abuelo Simón quiso ser un buen salvaje. Aprendió Castilla y el nombre de todos los santos. Danzó frente al templo y recibió el bautismo con una sonrisa. Mi abuelo tenía la fuerza del rayo rojo y su nahual era un tigre. Mi abuelo era un poeta que curaba con las palabras. Pero él quiso ser un buen salvaje. Aprendió a usar la cuchara y admiró la electricidad. Mi abuelo era un chamán poderoso que conocía el lenguaje de los dioses. Pero él quiso ser un buen salvaje, aunque nunca lo consiguió.
Pueden seguir.
Nereidais Nyabashayugit, New York. Nereidais Nyabashayugit, New York, me llamo Mukiene, Tumo Tucumá, Omo Ñoibos Meisis. Tumo Oreyomo, Tumo Paviñomo, Punajubo de Nasomora. Tumo Kia en Nepioyubo Costaxi, Nechasquien Bobois de Aguascascui. Yanukuis Nuha, Kushe Haya Iri, ni Jurobo Kubuina Sacobascomo. Yusete se yen o seji, te kyuran takiajubo pakakis, kawawa istukiaju tetsama, ha istukiao se shis. Iksek, yomi, tenasakoba, sitsungomo na istu, sumamotsi guaneridena, huyak bakunesta, yang nefana, ñatskucha. Teje, te pinacate, genera na natskuchevo, tumo nepia cubo paviñomo coroya. Teje, te tasubo naso norasne, genere namujabo, ucupiata ya piasca guanubo, pollo o mora. Nereidais me abashayugit Nueva York, me llamo Mukiene, Tumo Tucumá, Omoño y vos me dices. Nasakoba, Ucamus Pamano, Nino, Pinja y Anima, Nino, Yaxuja Kiondot, Sotumomone Comajis y Amesnie. Nino, no gusta Yaxuja Yahoboshis, Nino Yatuquiru Kiae Omo, te kiaemos tu diabuna ta unehindan y que jugo te un gotas meya omo, mino tejin, comino, mino.
¿Esto fue el último o tienes más?
Hay último.
¿Esto fue el último o vas a leer otro más?
Hay otro.
Hay uno más.
Vale. Un último, sí. Somos millones. Ven a mi tierra, instala tus máquinas, envenena los ríos que bebe el ganado, contamina los manantiales, llena de podredumbre el ojo de agua y el ojo de Dios. Engaña a mis hermanos, ofréceles el pan y la codicia, los placeres de la carne, el amor que se oferta al mejor postor. Soborna a mis hermanas, promételes poder y riqueza, háblales de las maravillas del primer mundo. Ven a mi tierra, instala tus máquinas aniquiladoras de ternura, muéstranos el dolor y la desesperanza, el impacto de las balas. Somos millones y no te tenemos miedo. Yuskoroya. Thank you. Gracias.
Muchas gracias a ti. Thank you very much, Mikias, for this lovely poetry. Although this is the kind of surprise that we always encounter we come across in IBAV, that the idea is to bring poetry written in every possible language in the Iberian Peninsula of both the continents. Moving on, last but not the least, is the poet Aditi Rao. Aditi is a writer, teacher, and potter. She has published widely in online and print journals, as well as 2 full-length collections of poetry, The Fingers Remember, Yola Press 2014, and A Kind of Freedom Song from the same press 2019. Her work has won several awards and fellowships, including the Hedgebrook Residency, the Akademi School Solitude Fellowship, the Sangam House Residency, Srinivas Rai Prize for Poetry, and Toto Funds, the Arts Creative Writing Award, the Muse India Young Writer Award, and others. And Aditi just mentioned her connection with Hispanic world. She spent 2 summers in Mexico, and she's familiar with different indigenous Mexican cultures, and and she's very much into Mexico. Aditi, I would like to invite you to share your poems with us. Can you hear us, Aditi?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. So yeah, thanks, Shabuto, and thank you to the Embassy of Mexico and to Cervantes for this invitation. I'm going to read 2 poems. One is short and one is longer. I had actually planned a different reading, and then just in the half an hour before we started, as we were talking about my connection to Latin America, I decided to read older work. So the one poem that I'm going to read from my last collection was written after I read at a festival organized by the students of the Aligarh Muslim University. And I always go back to that poem and that experience as remembering why I read and write poetry in terms of the connections it creates. And for me, today is also similar, and particularly Miquea's work around indigenous identities in Mexico is something very close to my heart. And so I want to start with that. And this is simply a poem called How to Begin Again for the women I met at Aligarh Muslim University, March 2017. When your words have begun to scare you with their sharp teeth and stale breath, read them to groups of women full of simmering rock. Volcanoes are mountains, but this is not a story of echoes. This is active outpouring. Sometimes all we need are witnesses and the permission to explode. This is how islands are born. This bursting of magma under too much pressure, gathering as steady masses in unsteady oceans. This is how we hold each other under and after pressure, destroying and creating in the same breath. The second poem I'm going to read is a long poem in multiple sections. It is the title poem of my first book, The Fingers Remember. And the reason I pulled this up just now in the middle of this conversation is this poem was literally written in 2010, in the summer of 2010, where I was walking around first Mexico City and then the mountains of the Sierra Norte de Puebla. And it was the first time in my life that I had absolutely no access to private space because I was sharing space with lots of people all the time. So a lot of this poem was written in like buses and church squares across Mexico. So The Fingers Remember. The epigraph is from a book I was reading at the time, Kiran Desai's The Inheritance of Loss, which is, you have to swear at a creature to be able to destroy it. 1. In the metro, a man, skin thick and brilliant like snake leather. When vendors of pens with built-in flashlights, rompecabezas, and pirated music have left, he scatters bottles, green and brown, throws his bare back against them. A shatter flies to my leg, the glint of a shard climbs into his eye. Clink, chest against glass, clink, back against glass, clink, fist shattering glass. Outside, a mountain, yet half-born, coughs through the mist. And across from me, a man who must be a professor taps his foot in rhythm to his iPod. I look at his face wrapped in red spectacles, notice he never blinks, wonder if it is the sound that kills. 2. Her father doesn't like the metro. I feel like a rat burrowing underground, says this campesino who knows what rats mean. Through the ride, he holds Jesus in his lap, a wooden chair with Jesus in it, cradled like a favorite blanket. Even underground, he will not remove his sombrero. If he must be a rat, he will be an authentic Mexican campesino rat. 3. I am nothing authentic. As a child, I was afraid of forgetting, scribbled myself onto every wall that didn't resist me. Then I learned my bones have a memory, words hide in their hollows, smashed into their marrow. Even when tongues forget and mouths prove too small, the fingers remember. Words flow from beneath my nails. Yesterday, on the phone with a would-be lover, I heard my bones crack. Old sounds pushed into corners by recent murmurings crawled out of their hiding places, wrestled for elbow room. My bones are not made for war, I told him in an accent I had never heard before. At night, my dreams bore subtitles, and a bright blue hand pressed into my back, guiding me out the window. 4. By a window, an avocado tree, a brilliant bougainvillea, drenched in a rooster's cries, drenched in the lethargy of caged rabbits, I throw my lives into the air, catching them as they fall, sorting which ones deserve lollipops, which I can compost, and which, plastic-like, will camp out in my backyard for 500 odd years. 500 odd years, the distance between now and when the bleached men came to Mexico or to India, it does not matter. As the professor in red spectacles lectures on colonialism, fist-banging table for emphasis, I think of a splinter of glass that traveled through my bloodstream, nestled between my ribs. All our children are now born with splinters between their ribs, their laughter tinged green, like a past that remembers. 6. On my birthday, I hike to the pyramid, home of Quetzalcoatl, feathered serpent, boundary maker. The air thick with centuries of prayer, I place mine in the pile, watch them dive into the valley. I am shaking off my skin. My cheek melts into stone trodden for at least 1,000 years, cheek against stone, goddess of earth, god of sky, transgressor between earth and sky. This is more than a pilgrimage. This is an avowal, a needle strung through Tepoztlan, emerging at Hadimba, holds the earth in perfect balance. 7. On the road, a veteran from America's next war collapsed already into a winter bowl. I fumble for change, find nothing I can give a refugee from the future. 8. I knot my days, settle them into boats folded from forgotten bus tickets, set the boats on a frozen river. The blue hand presses my chest into its owners, my ribs feel his heartbeat, he fingers my splinter. Year against year, we grow into each other. Wordless, we wait for the ice to melt, the boats to set sail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aditi, for this lovely Mexican experience. Impromptu, but it was lovely. And taking us to the heart of Mexico through your poems. Now, I would request Mardi to open the floor, and we have 5 minutes of question session. Audience can ask questions to our panelists, to our poets. Yeah, Smita raised the hand. Please unmute Smita, Mardi.
Yes, thank you, Shubhro, and thank you so much to all the poets and to Instituto Cervantes for having organized this wonderful session on poetry. And I have enjoyed each and every one of those poems, and some I would have to read again. Like, for example, Lara, thank you so much for the poem, and I will read it at least twice or thrice to savor it better. And I'm going to have a few questions, but since there are only 5 minutes, I don't think I will just add my questions. For Mikias, I just have one question which I thought was overarching, overwhelming me sort of. So I thought I wanted to ask this to Mikias. Mikias, yo puedo hablar en español también. ¿Está bien, Shubro? Si,
Sí, sí, por favor,
okay.
Smita.
Muchas
Tú eres
gracias.
una estrella de Cervantes, por favor, habla español.
Sí, muchas gracias. Shubro is my professor, and I think I need to be at my best in Spanish so that I don't mar his reputation, rather. Sí, muchas gracias. Y Mikias, quisiera preguntarte sobre el papel del lenguaje en transmitir las ideas, especialmente en casos de lenguajes indígenas y cuando un pueblo tiene que aprender otro lenguaje y no es posible siempre a transmitir todas las experiencias de un lenguaje indígena a otro lenguaje. Y hasta una persona me había dicho que lenguaje nos restringen y todas las experiencias no podemos transmitir a través de palabras. Quisiera saber tus opiniones sobre este. ¿Qué piensas?
Sí, bueno, pues yo pienso que es importante el lenguaje para transmitir la voz de un pueblo. En el caso mío, que somos un pueblo minoritario, que actualmente estamos sufriendo diversas amenazas de proyectos extractivistas en nuestro territorio. Creo que hoy más que nunca es importante el lenguaje para hacer llegar este mensaje de auxilio al planeta, porque somos un pueblo que tiene muchos recursos naturales que están siendo amenazados, y esos mismos recursos son también parte de nuestra vida comunitaria. Entonces, pienso que un poeta no puede ser ajeno a esas problemáticas que vive su pueblo, su comunidad, y la lengua, en este caso una tercera lengua, que muchos van a leer, que es el inglés. Yo escribo desde mi lengua materna, que es el zoque, hago las traducciones al español, porque desafortunadamente en México no hay una política educativa que incluya alfabetizarnos desde nuestras lenguas maternas. Entonces nos obligan a aprender el español, a escribir en español, a leer en español, y todos estos esfuerzos que se hacen en muchas lenguas en México, pues son esfuerzos personales, son esfuerzos extraordinarios que tenemos que hacer para poder transmitir mucho de nuestra filosofía y de nuestras comunidades. Y bueno, en inglés, pues son otros traductores, que también poetas, que en mi caso me han apoyado para hacer esa traslación, ¿no?, de mi trabajo. Y pienso que sí, que es muy importante. Quizás no puede ser tan exacto como en el original, pero en el caso del español, pues sí es bastante fiel, porque es mi propia poesía traducida al español, pero ya también traducida a otras lenguas.
Sí. Muchas gracias, muchas gracias.
Gracias, Mikias. Someone else want to ask some question to any of our panelists? No, then. So if there's no question, then we can conclude this session.
Actually, Shubro, there are lots of questions, but the time limit is such that,
So you can, since nobody asked any questions, you can ask one more.
Okay, muchas gracias. Okay. See, I wanted to ask Lara also, the level of vulnerability that one saw in your poems was amazing. It was like, it was like, I just wanted to ask you, as a poet, how much of your embarrassed, I mean, do you ever feel embarrassed, or do you ever, when you reread your poem, to like, for example, the poem in which you are talking about that life would be meaningless without you, I would lose my head, I would lose everything. So you've explained to the extent of absolutely, with total I would say abandonment, with complete honesty about everything that you do. So what does it take to be so uh, vulnerable as a poet?
Well, poetry has no limit between reality and fiction, and that's Baloo. And I use this no limit for I don't know if I can say plain, but do you understand when I say plain? To
Yeah, yes.
jump between fiction and reality. And but I think that, as you said, honesty is important writing in poetry, and I try to show not who I am, but how I feel when I write.
Right.
And I think that the only readings when I feel embarrassed is when my parents are in the room. Not with unknown people, not with friends, but yes, when I am reading my poetry with my parents, because I don't know if it's a question of respect or I don't know, but yes.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Smita. Thank you, Lara. Now there's a question for Akhil. Nikita asks a question. How has your relationship with the city, Delhi, evolved while writing about it?
Well, I guess like most migrants, like you find your feet in a new city, and one has experiences um, that one has drawn from one's own family. So, for instance, my grandparents had to do it in much more difficult circumstances. As I mentioned in the poem, my grandfathers struggled to set up a situation of even basic survival, first in a city in Punjab and then in Delhi, and eventually they moved to Lucknow, which is where most of their children and their grandchildren grew up. So I think migrants have a very keen eye for the city because they take nothing as given. Everything is, in some sense, a discovery to them. Uh, so that's how one relates to the city. And if on the way there are some good teachers and some good friends and some good colleagues and possibly some love, that always helps.
This is a lovely reply to that. But as a, I have this question. I mean, as a, like, you're probably a third generation migrant to the city, right, Akhil? So like I met Joginder Paul a long time back, the great respected Urdu novelist. He is Punjabi by birth, but he was Urdu writer, probably the only Indian writer who is very widely read in Pakistan, and like any other Indian writers. And he told me that his experience was with the city is a relationship, relationship of hatred. He hated the city first when he came to Delhi as a 22-year-old refugee from Pakistan. His heart was left there in Pakistan, and that was there forever. So did you feel the same with your grandparents somehow?
I think Pakistan was a strange kind of residue which remained in our family. And you're right and absolutely in saying that between the first and the third generations, there already was a shift in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, it was the high point of nostalgia. So, our house was this big, or the family had this much clout, or life was lived in such a manner. And in those stories, you could trace both fantasy and reality. Whereas by the third generation, we had unlearned some of, I think that hatred had skipped, the hatred had also thinned down by the time it came to us. So our access to Pakistan was with newer writers, with newer thinkers, with other teachers, with other films. So there was always, my grandmother, my Nani was always surprised by both my obsession with learning more and more about her life when she was 16 or 15 in that country, even as she was, even as she would give me one garrulous story after another. So I think they sat on a strange cusp, both longing for a place that they were told by experience somehow to hate. Yeah.
Like that where in the novel of Joginder Paul, Sleepwalkers, Khabron, the people who migrated from Lucknow to Pakistan, somewhere they built an artificial Lucknow there, and they were lost in that. That's a lovely novel. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, my panelists. Thank you so much, dear poets from across the globe. Dear, thank you very much, His Excellency, the Ambassador of Mexico, Mexican Embassy Cultural Section. Thank you very much, Instituto Cervantes, although it's my home, but I must say thank you to Oscar Pujol, our director, who is probably one of the two Indologists. Well, in Spain, there are only two Indologists, experts of India. Oscar is one of them, and he is a true Sanskrit scholar, and he speaks Hindi better than any Hindi speaker in this city. And thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, Marti, again. And we would conclude this session here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.